Hi, you're at Real Turkey channel. My name is Atilla Yeşilada, reaching out to you from sunny Istanbul. It's a beautiful day out there. Summer is in the air, I can feel it in my old bones, and Istanbul is a beautiful town. It's going to be even more beautiful because it's now governed by a CHP mayor, Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu, hopefully Turkey's next president. Okay, I understand. You don't have enough time for this kind of crap. So let's get to the subject. Turkey is currently in the midst of an economic stability program, austerity program, belt tightening program, which aims to disinflate, that's to reduce inflation, and to make Turkey's external deficits manageable, to reduce the current account deficit. I will call this economic stabilization program. And I'm going to claim here boldly and warn Ankara, if anybody speaks English in that goddamn town, that this economic stabilization program has only 6 months left. Unless very strict and additional measures are adopted within these 6 months, Turkey is going to face another crisis. It's going to be either a confidence crisis, which will lead to triple rate inflation, or it's going to be a currency crisis, and Turkish lira will once again become the weakest currency. If you watch my past videos, my last one was about the strength of the Turkish lira, how Turkish lira is and will for the next few months be the king of all emerging market currencies. This is because of two reasons. First, a lot of foreign investors who, for the right reasons, have stayed away from Turkish assets are now buying Turkish lira denominated assets because they are very cheap. This is called hot money or financial investments or carry trade, depending on how you do it. Two, a lot of high net worth Turkish savers are switching from FX to Turkish lira. These are both self-fulfilling prophecies. When 10% of emerging market funds buy Turkish assets and they began to outperform the rest rush in to add some Turkish lira assets to their portfolios. At home too, Turkish lira deposit rates are possibly still short of compensating the saver for perceived inflation, but that doesn't make a difference. If the total yield in a FX deposits, that's the dollar interest rate you earn from your deposit plus the expected rate of dollar TL appreciation is lower than the TL deposit rate, then to reduce your losses, to minimize your losses, you switch to TL. And the more people buy Turkish lira assets, the more currency comes into the country. And all the hard currency in a country like Turkey ends up at the central bank's balance sheet. In other words, Turkish central bank has begun accumulating FX reserves at an astounding speed. In the last 50 days, Turkish central bank bought more than $50 billion of FX from the market without bidding up the dollar. People are selling even at a lower dollar price just to get rid of their dollars or to convert their dollars into Turkish lira and benefit from the high yields and earnings potential of Turkish assets. And this is going to continue because for the summer and autumn, economic trends will support the perception that this economic stabilization program is on the right track. Now remember, Turkey is an energy importer and a tourism exporter. We spend roughly $50 billion on energy at the current prices. Sometimes it could be as high as $100 billion. And we generate roughly $45 billion of net revenue in tourism. In the winter, Turkish current account is always in deficit simply because we're buying too much energy to heat our homes, for the factories, for the electricity producers. In the summer, those needs lessen somewhat, and tourists come in, and tourists bring in hard currency with them. So automatically or seasonally, central bank reserves increase, and the current account data looks better. There is another seasonality in effect here. It's called the vegetable and fruit effect, to quote a colleague of mine whom I haven't seen for decades, which is that all CPI indices are obviously based on that country's consumer habits. In Turkey, people consume more vegetables and fruits in the summer, not because they prefer it that way, because they are cheaper. Now, obviously, Turkish agriculture has been devastated, and vegetable and fruit prices are no longer as cheap as they used to be, but nevertheless, they are cheaper than the winter. So automatically inflation goes down. And of course, energy is always a component of the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and in summer, people spend less on energy, unless you want to feel more comfortable and turn on your air conditioner. You don't pay much for electricity or natural gas. So inflation is also lower. Let me repeat myself. For the next, between May and October, Turkey gets a lot of tourism revenue, central bank reserves go up, Turkish inflation goes down, largely because of seasonality. So inflation trends look good, which brings in more foreign capital, which makes Turkish lira assets more attractive. Central bank accumulates more reserves, and Turkish savers are, by necessity, forced to switch to Turkish currency deposits. Unfortunately, there is no guarantee that these trends will continue. Let me cite the reasons. For one thing, there is really no progress on inflation. If you look at trends, Turkish inflation is extremely high and extremely sticky. Our economy czar, Mehmet Simsek, will tell you that the only survey of its kind available in Turkey, the Central Bank Monthly Participants or Market Survey, shows inflation expectations declining for the next 12 months and 24 months. Yeah, but he should also tell you that over the last 10 years, the results of that survey has been on average 10 points lower than the actual inflation. Essentially, central bank surveys like 50 people, experts, and they tell you what you want to hear. Otherwise, you're excluded from the survey. So even though officially Turkey's inflation expectations go down, it's not true that people's perception of inflation is going down. And Turkish Central Bank bases its monetary policy on that survey rather than what it should do, which is go out there and really just question people what they think inflation is. So at some point, the monetary policy, which quote unquote looks tight right now, looks like sufficient enough to reduce domestic demand, is going to be inadequate. This is going to become apparent after October when the winter comes and inflation starts rising for seasonal reasons. Secondly, current account deficits. Clearly, Turkey has done a lot to reduce its current account deficit, but none of it has really come from lower domestic demand. Turkey has strictly regulated gold imports, which has helped. Energy prices have helped. They are much lower, in particular natural gas. Oil is not that much of a problem anyhow. Turkey's natural gas bill is the most volatile component. But there is no guarantee that these things will work. If you look at the latest export-import data, you will see that even though Turkish trade deficit on an annual basis is declining, imports of consumer goods are increasing. And that makes sense. If inflation is 5% a month, as an example, but dollar TL is appreciating only 1%, that means imported wine has become 4% cheaper in Turkish lira terms. 4% is not important if you are buying a $100 bottle of French wine. But over 10 months, that makes 40%. So you cannot pursue an economic stabilization program based solely on currency appreciation. And that seems to be the problem with Turkey. Your typical austerity program or economic stabilization program has at least three legs. Tight monetary policy, that's high interest rates. Tight fiscal policy, which means cutting down your budget deficits and possibly generating budget surpluses or at least non-interest budget surpluses. And three, structural reforms. Getting rid of the economic habits or government policies that brought you to this point in history. Turkey is not doing much on fiscal or the structural side. On fiscal, if you look at the archive, the video before the prior one talked about Mehmet Simsek's first package of fiscal austerity measures, which were really just flopped. Total expected savings are like $3 billion. Turkey is a $1.1 trillion economy. So you tell me whether saving $3 billion is a big deal. And our budget deficit is 6% of GDP. That's like, so $66 billion expected budget deficit. So if you got $3 billion, that's just not going to make a huge difference. Additionally, those measures assume that the expenditures that will be cut, essentially it's a package to reduce waste and inefficiency in public service, bureaucracy, that the bureaucrats, the mandarins, will abide by them. Such packages have been passed in the past, and none of them have resulted in a penny of savings. Bureaucrats cling to their privileges and fight for them until death. Even assuming all of the savings are materialized, as I've said, $3 billion is nothing. I'm talking about generating at least 2% of GDP, which is $20 billion of savings. Now, Mr. Mehmet Simsek has promised several more packages, some of which could really make a huge impact on Turkey's fiscal deficits, such as, imposing a minimum corporate tax, regardless of exceptions, that's closing loopholes, amending the public tender law where most of the corruption and inefficiency occurs, going after tax cheats. If he can do those, then yeah, Turkey will avert a crisis. But all of these are conditional on the approval of the president, Mr. Erdogan. And the reason why we have such wasteful budgetary practices is because a lot of the budget goes either to feeding Erdogan's constituencies or his cronies. And any fiscal savings package will, by definition, have to reduce the privileges or the rent, the benefits these cronies receive from the state. So the big question is not whether Mehmet Simsek can design and implement a decent fiscal austerity package. The question is whether Mr. Erdogan will sign under it. I don't know. Erdogan is changing rapidly. I should do a video on Turkish politics and the changing dynamics. But you gotta remember, leaving aside all of his merits and shortcomings, Erdogan is a politician who is laser sharp focused on winning the next election. And how you win the next election? You feed your constituencies and you transfer money or state funds to those rich people who will finance your election campaign. That's how politics work in every country which has contested elections. And essentially, Mehmet Simsek is asking, Erdogan to sacrifice his electoral prospects by adopting fiscal measures. And 3, expectations. You live in a country where either once a year or every 6 months, everybody's salary and wages adjusted, minimum wages raised. Pensioners get a top-up on their monthly payments. State servants get a top-up. And all of these adjustments are based on past inflation, which introduces inertia in inflation, or what we call stickiness. And unless you change that, unless you can switch from a system where these annual or semi-annual adjustments are made based on projected inflation and not the past, you are doomed to failure. Now, that's the hardest part. As I've said, all of these factors combined, allow me to say one more thing. In addition, there is a possibility of external shocks. I don't do many videos on emerging markets, but currently a lot of the attraction that Turkey has for America, Londra, or Asia-based emerging markets funds is because they expect Fed to cut rates. There is a very simple rule of making money in emerging markets. If US rates go down, or if the US dollar weakens, you invest into emerging markets and you make shit tons of money. Now, I personally don't think Fed is going to cut interest rates that easily, that soon, or that the monetary easing cycle is going to be that deep. That kind of disappointment could reduce Turkey's attractiveness. Or we could have an energy shock. Russian forces are making advances in Ukraine. I don't think they're going to reconquer any of the major cities, but I think the more Putin advances in Ukraine, the more frightened the West becomes of Ukraine, of Putin's next target being beyond Ukraine, Poland, Baltics, etc. And the only way to stop Putin is A, more military aid to Ukraine, but as importantly, to tighten the restrictions on Russia's hydrocarbon exports. So essentially, the oil and natural gas market, the hydrocarbons market, has become a strategic weapon. The West is going to use that. We could have an oil shock, or we could have an oil shock with a lesser probability because of developments in the Middle East. So winter is going to be very harsh for Turkey. I don't want to be unduly pessimistic. I appreciate everything Mehmet Simsek does. He's the best we have. Unfortunately, there are a lot of qualified people, but none of them would or could work for AKP. But whether Erdogan would give Mehmet Simsek the wherewithal to take those additional measures, such as allowing the central bank to raise interest rates further from the current 50% to 60 to 65, is a big question mark in my mind. Over the summer, I'm sure I'm going to revisit this subject rapidly. But by the way, I don't think the central bank needs to raise rates before early autumn. So if by mid-autumn central bank hasn't raised interest rates, then you can be more pessimistic about Turkey's prospects. But more importantly, the fiscal packages that Mr. Mehmet Simsek insinuated or promised needs to be implemented rapidly. So if you're interested about whether Turkey's economic stabilization program is going to be successful or not, you got to look at the fiscal side. This has been a video by Real Turkey channel, and I'm Atilla Yeşilada. I want to thank you for watching my channel and from your delightful comments. Keep them coming. And if you like it, subscribe or ring the bell or whatever. Bye-bye now.